Welcome to Hot Off the Press, the show about new releases and the people that bring them to us. Before we get started, let's go around the room and have everyone introduce themselves. We'll go ahead and start with you, JD.
Hi, I'm JD Blackrose. I write a little bit of urban fantasy, a little bit of humorous fantasy, and the stuff we'll be talking about tonight is my Zombie Cosmetologist novella series.
Thank you. And Samantha.
Hi, I'm Samantha Bryant. I write the Menopausal Superhero series and other women-centered speculative fiction.
Great. Gail?
Hi, I'm Gail Z Martin and Morgan Bryce. As Gail, I write urban fantasy, epic fantasy, steampunk, near future, post-apocalyptic, and more. And as Morgan Bryce, I write urban fantasy, male paranormal romance.
Great. And finally, Tamsin.
Hi, I'm Tamsin Silver, and I'm an author with Falstaff Books, and I write both urban fantasy and historical fantasy. Tonight, we'll be focusing on my new series. It's the Urban Legends, it's the Untold Legends series. It's Billy the Kid centered.
All right, great. So let's go ahead and get into the releases that we're going to talk about tonight. I'll start with you, Samantha. I know you've got a few, but where did you get the idea for the book / series or the stories? Because I know you have some anthology.
Okay, so the book I'm here to talk about tonight is this one. This is Through Thick and Thin, and it's the newest release in the Menopausal Superhero series. This one is a set of short stories. The series itself started probably because I was frustrated by X-Men movies. My husband and I had just seen one of the X-Men movies, and honestly, I don't remember which one now. And we were out walking our dog, because that's the only way people with a kid get to talk to each other. And we were talking about the movie, and I was really frustrated by the whole puberty brings you superpowers theme that seems to come about so often. And so I made a joke and said something like, you know, well, if hormones give you superpowers, then menopausal women should have the corner on that market. And he thought that was really funny and told me I should write it down. And so I started writing it down. And then here we are, 6 books later and 2 more on the way.
All right. And your anthologies?
Yes, in October, I've got 2 anthologies coming out. I'm in an anthology called Slay, Stories of the Vampire Noir with Mocha Memoirs Press. And as that sounds like, it's all vampire stories that are have characters or settings that come from the African diaspora. And the other one is from Chrome Girls Press and is called Stories We Tell After Midnight. And interestingly, my story in that one also is kind of vampire themed, which is funny because up until I wrote these 2 stories, I'd never written any vampires. But they're both out in October.
All right. Great. Perfect. Gail, how about your stories?
Well, we're juggling a couple of things. Creature Feature is the next Spell, Salt, and Steel story, and that's in the Mark Wojcik series that I write with my husband and co-author Larry N. Martin, with the Mechanic and Monster Hunter in Western Pennsylvania. And that is the 7th novella in that series. So that should be coming out very shortly from Falstaff Books. We're just finalizing the cover now. The other Gail book that is in process and coming into the home stretch is Fugitive's Vow, which is the 3rd in the Assassins of Landria series. That's epic fantasy for without the epic length. And it's epic fantasy buddy flick style. So it's a little lighter, a little faster paced, a little shorter for people who love epic fantasy but don't have time to read big, thick epic fantasy books. So that one is coming into the home stretch of being drafted. And then on the Morgan Bryce side, got a couple of things going. One is the Beyond the Realms series that comes out in October. 8 authors who all wrote in their own universes, but each book to the same prompt. So we all had to write to the prompt of a stranger comes up behind you, taps you on the shoulder and says, there's no time. This is important. I need you to remember and then whatever it is they told you to remember is the title of the book. And all 8 of us wrote in different worlds to that prompt. So mine is in my Fox Hollow Shifter series in the Adirondacks, and it's Imaginary Lover. It's about a guy who wakes up at the side of the road with no memory of who he is, how he got there, and it all goes from there. So that's been, you know, a lot of fun doing with a bunch of other authors. It's just a kind of different thing. And then we'll be talking on a later hot off the press about Trick or Treat at Cam Castle, which is another multi-author shared world.
Okay, great. Now going back to your Assassin's Honor, what was the prompt or the seed behind that book or the series?
People come up to me at convention tables and they pick up, you know, one of my Chronicles of the Necromancer or Ascendant Kingdom Saga. They're all, you know, bricks. They're all Chihuahua Killers or the Ascendant Kingdoms, Darkhurst, Chronicles of the Necromancer. They're all like 600 pages long. And they'd look at it wistfully and they'd go, I used to like to read epic fantasy. I just don't have time. And I felt so bad for them because I know what that's like. And so Assassins of Landria has all the epic feels without the epic length. So where in a normal epic fantasy, part of what makes it so long is you usually have 4 or 5 concurrent stories with different point of view characters that all braid together to finally, you know, come to the big conclusion all together. This is just from the 2 protagonists' point of view. So you don't have all the extra braided stories. You don't have all the extra point of view. That makes it faster paced. It makes it a shorter story because you don't have to braid in as many things, but it still has all the epic feels. And it's a little lighter, a little funnier. These 2 guys, if you think Butch and Sundance as medieval assassins, that would be these guys. Their handler says they know that they're the top 2 assassins in the kingdom. And he just wishes they would quit blowing things up because, you know, stealth. They're not good at the stealth part. But yeah, that's pretty much where it came from, is wanting to give people the experience when they didn't have the time.
Great. Perfect. Tamsin.
So the newest one that's just come out is The Torment of Richard Brewer. It is the 2nd book in the Untold Legend series. The first one is The Curse of Billy the Kid. 3rd one will be The Murder of Cricket Kugler. Each of these people are real people from history. Obviously, everyone knows who Billy the Kid is. What I get a lot is, who was Richard Brewer? Richard Brewer was John Tunstall's foreman, and he was the first leader of the Regulators. And if you've seen any of the Billy the Kid movies, you know who the Regulators were. I believe Charlie Sheen played Brewer in Young Guns, if I'm not mistaken. He was a very tall, well-built man. He was one of those people that wanted to live on his farm and just have animals and everyone to leave him alone. And that did not work out so great for him. Because he got involved in the Lincoln County War. He took charge because he's a very strong moral center. They refer to him as Lionheart sometimes. And so so the story revolves a little bit around his choices. Book 1 ends with him being shot and buried alive, because there's nothing more fun than letting fantasy sit on a cliffhanger when you finish a book. Book 2 picks up right where we leave off, and it's with Billy heading back to make sure to get him. And it goes forward, and the book really works on their friendship, and you start to really learn why the bad guys chase, why Billy's type of character is so interesting to them. He is a spirit warrior. He is the good guy, even though he doesn't want to necessarily, he doesn't think he is. So when he is going to learn in book 2 why the werewolves want to kill him. They get something out of it. It's not just to kill him off. And it affects Brewer in a way that changes the path of the story. And so this is a chance for you guys to really get to know Richard Brewer and his choices into book 2 that will affect the rest of the series. And so book one started with the death of John Tunstall, which is the inciting incident to the Lincoln County War. Book 1 ends at the Battle of the Mill, Blazers Mill. It picks up after that. Second book takes you all the way through the 5-day battle that quote unquote ends the war. It was a very short war. That's why no one ever taught it to you in school. Anyone who's a big fan of Billy the Kid, they all know about the 5-day battle. This book definitely takes you through the 5-day battle from inside the McSween house. So it's based in history. Almost everything there is historic except for the fantasy sections. And then book 3 will pick up where that one moves off, which I'm almost done writing. I've got a couple more scenes to write and book 3 will be complete.
Okay. So what made you choose Billy the Kid and that point in time?
I was, Misty Massey was doing what was it? They were going to do an anthology for Weird Westerns. And this was back when I lived in New York and I didn't have anything in an anthology yet. And that was the real big thing at the time. And I'm not usually someone who writes short stories. So I was like, well, I can try. We'll give it our best shot. What do I know from the Wild West? And I was like, Billy the Kid. So I looked him up and then I learned about John Tunstall's murder and I was down the rabbit hole. And I just was fascinated with things I never understood about Billy the Kid, things that people believe but are wrong about. And the more I got to know his character, the more I was interested. So I started creating a short story. And since I write fantasy, I used fantasy as what ties it all together. And I wrote the short. It was rejected. Best rejection ever. They said, this is great. We really love this idea. We love this character. It's well written. We don't want to take the rights. You should do a full book. And I said, I think you're right. And so I began working on a full novel. I went back out to Lincoln County to do more research and fell in love with New Mexico. And now I live here.
All right. Thank you so much. JD, how about your books?
Yeah, thanks. So, I mean, a couple things. So Pluck and Cover was the first zombie cosmetologist novella. Looks like this. And then it was followed up with Hide and Chic, which looks like this.
I love those titles.
Thank you. I worked really hard on them, actually. So you can see the little lipstick and the little mascara. I actually wanted the mascara to have like little legs and arms and be like running away from the machete, but we couldn't quite do that. And the third one, and this one is called Cut and Died with a Y. And that will be coming out not too long. And so you can see there's obviously a play on words here. And Waylon Jenkins is a zombie. He was turned at the Battle of Shiloh during the Civil War. And he is also a cosmetologist to the stars in Calabasas, California. And he is notably the cosmetologist to Mitzi, one name only, who is one of the big it girls in Hollywood. And he became a cosmetologist because as he continued to live a long life, he doesn't age, but as he continued to live a long life, you know, things happen and he got scars and, you know, he got a finger caught in a terrible bleacher accident and things like this. And so parts had to be repaired and he was left with these scars and he wanted to learn special effects makeup and cosmetology and professional makeup use so he could learn to cover these scars. And so he turned it into a career. He had to keep reinventing himself, of course. But that's how he got into it. And so no one actually believes that he's a zombie. Of course, they just think he's eccentric. So his business card actually says no scar too hard, zombie cosmetologist. But that's his sort of claim to fame. and he knows everyone and every secret in Hollywood. He knows everyone who has his nose job and everybody who's at a lift, but he doesn't tell. So in the very first book, he gets pulled into a murder mystery because the local sheriff does know that he's a zombie, and there's actually a short story that he uses a giveaway that explains how they met. And the body starts showing up with limbs missing, and the local police captain thinks that the zombie has to be the killer because who else needs the spare parts? So poor Waylon, who's a lover, not a fighter, winds up being pulled into this murder mystery in order to, clear his name. And the ghost of Betsy Ross, who is his personal assistant, winds up having to help him. You need someone to sew those spare parts on. So why not the world's most famous seamstress? And hijinks ensue. So it's very fun. I think it's not meant to be like deep mind melding kind of, fantasy, but there are parts that are actually poignant. Waylon has PTSD from his change, from when he was forced to become a zombie. He didn't choose it, it was forced on him. And that actually is a theme that runs through. There are some true poignancies in this, particularly when you get to the third book, Cut and Dyed, and you'll see that comes out. So I hope people work through me. I'm a little worried that some people might be upset by the third novella because there's some seriousness to it. But stick with me, folks, because the fourth one is coming along and will be very funny. So, and just one last thing, Witches, Warriors, and Wise Women was another thing that came out very recently. This is from Perspective Press, and I have a story in here along with a lot of other really, really, really fun folks, and including Gail, who has a story in here too. So this is a new thing that just also came out.
All right, perfect, great. Now, this kind of bounces off because all of you guys are doing series. Are there any differences in your process? And I'll start with Gail, between writing a standalone novel and a series, either in your process or, obviously you have to leave it open at the end of a series so that it can keep going. But other than that, are there any differences when you're going into a story? Do you know when your idea pops up, whether it's going to be one or the other?
Well, everything I've written has become a series. So what I can say is that some series are open-ended and other series have a definite arc. So for example, with the Darkhurst series and with the Ascending Kingdom saga, I knew going into it that they were only going to be, one of them was 3 books, one of them was 4 books. I knew what story, and there wasn't more after that. At some point people just get to put their feet up and have a beer after they've saved the world. Their whole life doesn't have to be interesting. With other series, it's more episodic, like the Deadly Curiosity series. It really is a series of different, if you think of them like TV episodes, where that can kind of go on forever because time moves differently, of course, like soap opera time. And so I think as long as, and when I've written series, I also generally you don't have to read all of the books to get to the end of one story. Each book has a self-contained stopping point, but then they build on each other. And that's even true in the ones that are more episodic. Of course, characters evolve and relationships evolve and people learn things and gain new abilities. So I guess it really depends on the scope of the story you're trying to tell.
Okay. Tamsin.
I think I only have one standalone, and it's left open for me to write more. And I already have ideas on doing that. For me, the biggest difference is between when I write urban fantasy and when I write historical fantasy. My historical fantasy takes more time, and it takes, I tend to write things a little different. This one in particular that I've been working on now, the third book, I actually did not write it I usually write kind of linearly. Sometimes I'll go and I'll write a section from history and then I'll eventually go grab it and toss it in. But I actually wrote the 1949 section on its own, and I wrote the 1879, 80, 81 section on its own this time. Mainly because of spending more time at home due to things and needing to kind of find a better way to focus. Bless you.
Sorry about that.
I just needed something to help me focus a little better, so I did that. But mostly what I do write is a serial series, episodic kind of thing. I tend to think in threes. There is talk right now with Falstaff regarding a standalone for something, but that's not worked out yet, and who knows? And so maybe once I do that, I'll have a better idea how to answer that question, because I have a tendency to think in not just large world build, but large story arc. So, yeah, so that's really the only difference I've noticed, is that when I write urban fantasy, there's such a freedom. I can just, with historical, there's a lot more confining, and so I get a little more nitpicky. I take a little more time, and I have to break things down differently.
Do you think you're going to continue your Legends series after the third one with Cricket?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I can tell you, because I think I've mentioned it in other panels, so it won't be a huge shock. In 1881, when I reveal how Billy has survived the fact that he was shot, he does go off for training to become an official regulator in England. He goes off to England. He is working in England in the late 1800s. We will be dealing with Jack the Ripper. We will be dealing with H.H. Holmes. We will be dealing in 1885. In 1885, we'll be dealing with the Servant Girl Annihilator. So all of which are thought to all be the same man, possibly. And so basically, once I finish this, I start a whole new couple years of research on serial killers and writing the story back and forth with regard to building the Untold Legends world, new creatures, new things from the other world, and stuff like that.
All right, perfect. JD, what about you?
You know, something I'm working on right now is already, it's contracted to be a trilogy. So, you know, I know I'm writing 3 books. There's a practical reason for that, just being honest. You know, readers do enjoy when they get into some characters. They want to see more of them, right? So, and you hope that you write something that catches their interest and that they'd want to see more of. There's a follow through, and practically, just being really honest with people, financially, it's good for publishers and writers. I mean, just to be transparent and honest, when somebody reads a book and they like that character, they want to read more of it. And so it's a good situation for both the reader and the writer to have more of it, right? People will buy the second book and they'll buy the third book because they like that. They want to see those characters do more things. And so the writer wants to give them that, and everybody wins, right? The reader gets something that they enjoy, and the writer gets to write books that sell, because, I mean, that's the whole idea, right? I mean, that's the sort of unspoken covenant, if you will, between the writer and the reader, which is that I'm going to create a world that will draw you in. And the reader says, yes, 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 now give me more of that, right? That's the agreement. That's the whole point. It doesn't do anyone any good if you create, not that I don't believe in standalones. I think there are really good standalones that are out there that tell a story and end. But I think in today's world, a lot of readers, particularly in the genre that we all write in, a lot of readers say, I want you to create something wonderful, And if you keep writing it, I will keep reading it. And that it's the covenant between the writer and the reader. And it works well for everybody because the reader gets the enjoyment of that, and the writer gets also the enjoyment, but also the financial reward. And that's the agreement. That's the unspoken, like I keep using the word covenant, but that's the unspoken covenant between the two. So as a writer, it's my deepest desire and pleasure to create something that readers respond to and want to read more of. That's what I do it for. It's my hope that people will read the first book and want a second and want a third and want those characters, you know, as much as I want those characters, because those characters live in my head. I talk to them all the time, you know. And I have been accused of being hard of hearing and by real people. And I'll have to explain to them that I'm not hard of hearing. You're just interrupting a conversation I'm already having. So, you know, that I hear fine, but you're the rude person interrupting my conversation. So like, I live with these people in my head constantly, and I want other people to like them as much as I do. So I want to keep writing them as long as they're talking to me and I have stories to tell. So that lends itself to more books, that lends itself to more novellas, that lends itself to short stories in between, that lends itself to letting the world expand. And as long as readers want that, I am happy and pleased and proud and thrilled to be able to do it. So.
All right, perfect. Samantha? Oh, sorry.
I was going to say, I think that really goes with genre fiction because, you know, it's about somebody's epiphanies during their divorce. Well, how many times are they going to get divorced? Is this going to be a 5-book series? Or their, you know, midlife crisis. Well, how many of those are they going to have? You know, or they go to find themselves. How many times? You know, there are some things that you can only write one book about. Right. It's not going to be a series where if it's somebody who trips over dead bodies every time they go out the door, or somebody solving crimes or solving mysteries or doing something, that lends itself to a lot more stories. You know, even with romances, okay, they only fall in love once, but then they show up because they're the best friend, the buddy, the next door neighbor, you know, there's a whole town. I think the genre fiction lends itself to series better than some other types of literature.
Definitely makes sense. Samantha?
So when I started writing this series, I had no idea it would be a series. It's the second novel I completed writing, and it was my debut novel. Going Through the Change was my debut novel. And so I was still really new to the process. Like in my writing life before I started writing novels, I wrote mostly poetry and essays. So I kind of went from 500 words to 85K because, you know, that's a natural, simple expression. And I was quite a ways through writing Going Through the Change before it became clear to me that this was not tellable in one book. And so, you know, I've been learning about writing a series by writing a series. And then, you know, in my other work that, you know, I have to fit my writing life into part-time. I am a full-time teacher, a full-time mother, and a part-time writer. So generally that means I can complete a book every year, thereabouts. So that makes me much slower than some of my prolific friends here on the panel with me. But so I have other projects besides the Menopausal Superheroes that probably are standalone books, but because I can only devote so much time, I haven't finished any of them yet to learn how it's really different. I was writing a gothic romance, which I had to put down because I have a deadline for the 4th menopausal superhero novel. And that one I think will be just one book. And I think one of the big differences was not already being immersed in the world. You know, by the time I'm writing the 4th novel and the 7th story in the menopausal superheroes stories now, and I know this whole world and everybody in it inside and out and upside down and backwards because, you know, that's what I've been writing. And then when I went to write The Architect and the Heir, that's a complete different setting, a complete different kind of story. It's a Gothic romance set in 1890. And so, you know, I really had to rediscover it. And I liked that as a writing thing, because I think one of the things to watch out for in writing a series is your burnout. If it starts to feel rote to you, R-O-T-E, not W-R-O-T-E, it's gonna feel stale to your readers too. You know, no surprise, no passion for you, no surprise, no passion for your readers. And I am certainly not going to name them, but I have read series that fizzled out on me, you know, that like, I loved it, I loved it, I loved it, I loved it. And then like, maybe they should have stopped 2 books ago, because clearly they're stretching to still get more work out of this. And I'm hoping for myself that I will know when I have hit that. You know, I'm contracted for 2 more on menopausal superhero novels, and I feel certain that there's plenty of story for those 2. And then we'll see beyond that, or if it's time to move on to other projects then.
Now, do you feel that the standalones, because you don't get to immerse yourself book after book, feel more superficial, or do you have to work harder to build that universe?
I definitely had to work harder to start it, because I had to create, you know, even though it's set in a realistic world, or as realistic as, you know, still allows supernatural elements, it's brand new people that I have to get to know, brand new setting, brand new everything. So it definitely had that feeling of discovery. And I think that's what I will love about it too. It's one of the reasons that I like to write for anthologies, is because I like the chance to play in something, and anthologies let me do that in a shorter format that might take me somewhere between a week and a month to write. And so I can play with a vampire story without committing the next year of my life.
All right. Thank you. Now, getting back to the series, and I'll start with you, Tamsin. What was something that surprised you during this process? It doesn't have to be this book, just in writing this series.
I originally was planning this to be 1 book. And then when we realized it was long, we were like, okay, it's 2. I'll pitch it as 2. And then when we signed a contract, they said, we want 3. And I'm like, oh, well, then I will do a 3rd one, because I had an idea for the 3rd one. I wanted to revolve around the murder of Cricket Kugler in Las Cruces in 1949. And I had been playing with it, but I hadn't necessarily had a plan. The other ones I had a plan. I mean, the war goes from here to here. I wrote the war. I wrote the stuff between. We're done. No, we're not. So one of the things that, so the whole 3rd book has been kind of interesting for me, and mostly the ending. So I wrote the end a while ago, because I'm one of those people that all of a sudden when I think I can see it, I write it, and then I tend to connect where I'm at to that ending. And when I wrote the end, it was actually an aha moment for me, as well as it's going to be for everyone else. Billy showed me what everything meant from the first day through to the end. And he gave it, and he ended it all in a bow for me, and he handed it to me on a platter, and I just sat there and in shock and in tears, and just was like, I had no idea. And so that's been my biggest surprise, is to see where this took it, and see how it ends for him, and what it means for him, and how that relates to the first book. And that was probably my biggest surprise in working on these, was that revelation of how he ends book 3, and how much I really love it.
Now, by writing the ending so early in the process, did you ever feel that it kind of pinned you in, or did you think maybe, okay, if it doesn't head that direction, I'll swap it out? And
no, I didn't. I did have one tiny thing. I went back and I was gonna do something with the end, with the reveal of my idea of who killed her, because it was never solved. Till this day, there is no definite on who killed her. everybody's pretty sure, but no one ever paid for it. And I was going to go one way that I thought I'd go, and then I didn't. And I realized why. No, I'm being super vague. Sorry.
Oh, yeah.
I just don't want to give away.
Exactly.
I don't want to give away things from the end, but I really didn't pigeonhole myself. I really, when I wrote it, it actually, I wrote the ending, and then something else. I got another research book, and it's written by one of the sheriff's, I think, sons, and he was killed when he got out of federal prison for what he went for, again, vague. So, and I all of a sudden realized that he dies on the exact day, just a couple years later, that Cricket was buried when my boys drive into town. So we actually, and I was like, and I needed to write that scene. And I realized suddenly that I needed to add that in there, that was obviously that meant something. And so I went back and I modified the ending to be a little longer. And it includes that situation that I learned about later on. So that would be the only change, but that wasn't that I pigeonholed myself. It was that I learned more information.
Oh, great. JD, what surprised you with your books?
Well, I just want to react to something that Tamsin said, and it wasn't with these books. Like sometimes it is true. It doesn't happen often, but sometimes it is true that something happens while you're writing that you don't expect. In the Soul Wars, which was my first novella series, and the way I write the novella is they create a book. They actually create a novel. So it's really, the Soul Wars is really my first novel, but it's told in a series of 4 novellas that all link together. And I knew what was going to happen to this one character. I just knew what was going to happen. Like I had it all planned out. This is what was going to happen. And this one character, I knew it was going to happen, and something bad happened to him, and then he was going to get better. And I'm writing the scene, and it was truly like my fingers were typing, and they typed something else. And I sort of looked at my hands and looked at the screen, and I said to this character, "I'm so sorry. That's not going to happen. I didn't realize. I'm so sorry." Like I felt so bad because I had promised him that he was going to get better, and he wasn't. And I didn't know it until I typed it, that he was going to stay in this really bad situation, and he was not. I felt terrible. But I had promised him he was going to get better, and he wasn't going to get better. And he was going to stay in this really, really awful, sad situation. And I thought he was going to get better, and he wasn't. And I'm telling you, it wasn't until I typed it that I realized that was what was going to happen. And I walked around for the rest of the day thinking, how did that happen? Because I had planned it to the nth degree. I knew what was going to happen, and it's not what happened. And it was really, truly like the creative process, like my subconscious just writing for me. And it doesn't happen often, really. It doesn't happen often because I think, I've become a better plotter. But every once in a while that can happen. That truly can happen, where like you're writing, and something just happens out of the blue, and I'm as shocked and surprised as anybody else. Like I had.
So
I apologize to Melissa.
Go ahead, Samantha.
I wrote a scene, and I'm crying in Starbucks because I kill someone. And I'm crying. I'm like, Melissa Gilbert's gonna kick my ass. Like, she's gonna be so mad at me. And that's literally what I kept saying is, I'm so sorry, Melissa.
Yeah. No, I mean, I can say it because this book's been out for a while. I had a vampire who was defanged. They pulled his fangs out. And I promised him he was going to get his fangs back, and he didn't. And I didn't know until after I typed it. And I was like, I'm so sorry.
So what I was going to say is you say that it doesn't happen often, but that is exactly my MO. You know, I'm a pantser, or I think of it as being a discovery writer, and that I write to discover the story. And that happens to me so often.
Really?
That I would say it's my process. Like a big one for me is there is a character who in the second book surprised me by taking up a relationship with another woman. I didn't know she was gay.
She told you.
But apparently some part of me did know, because I took it to my critique group, and I'm like, oh, they're going to eat me alive. They're going to say this is out of left field. There was nothing in it. And they were all like, well, it's about time.
Right. So you were planning it without planning it.
Yeah, I was planning it.
Right.
I didn't tell me.
Yeah.
I think that's the goal for most writers, is to have those moments.
Well, they are my favorite moments. Like, I really feel happiest when I'm like, oh, I discovered something in my own story.
Right. It's great when it really, truly takes you by surprise. I mean, I have, obviously, as you're writing, there's discovery that comes along with it. But I remember this moment because I was truly as shocked as I could have been, because I did not know that was coming, because I had written down what was going to happen to him, and that is not what happened. And it was like, and I had to apologize to him, because that's what happened.
Perfect.
I don't know, maybe Gail doesn't ever have that happen because she's so perfectly plotted.
No, stuff that happens with me sometimes, you know, a character that I think is just going to have a walk-on part ends up in the next 4 books because he just shows up and refuses to leave. I've had that happen.
Squatters.
Yeah, somebody just, it's like that bit part actor that steals the scene. And, you know, that's really fun when that happens, because that turns somebody who's really just, you know, kind of there to, their original purpose is to like walk on and take the horse away. And it turns out that they have so much more to them. So that's really fun. I think on the less fun side of it, more the mechanical side of it, is sometimes when you, because I outline everything, and it's not super, super detailed, but it's pages. When you get to a scene that you've outlined and you kind of have this all figured out based on how long the book needs to be, and so you're kind of trying to make sure the story fits in the word count, or maybe you have a required word count, and you realize when you get into the nitty-gritty of actually writing what's in the outline that there isn't enough there to, you need more. Something, there needs to be something else, there needs to be some other danger, there needs to be some sort of additional subplot, because while it was very pretty words in the outline, it sounded really good, you need something more. And so those are when you really have to go, okay, what fits here? Usually your subconscious has kind of started to drop that in anyhow, you just didn't realize it. And so you go back and you look for those threads, and you give them more screen time, kind of weave them into something bigger. But that's more of a pain in the neck, because then it's like, well, crap, you know,
Right.
I'm
Right.
too close to the end and I still have more book I need to write. So
Or for me, it's the opposite. For me, it's I'm too far from the end and I have 20,000 more words left to write. Where are those going to come from?
Yeah, I write light in my first drafts as well, and then have to go back and layer in and add complexity. The first, probably my first drafts would be something like Stuart Jaffe would call an outline.
mm-hmm.
But I consider it a draft.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And sometimes you just have to get into it to that point to understand what you're missing, and then you can go back and put it in. But you had to write it the first way in order to know what you needed to add.
Well, this is different from Tamsin, because Tamsin, when I first met Tamsin, she said, I'm a wordy girl. That was like one of her first descriptions. She was like, I write a lot of words.
I write a lot of words. I do. I write a lot of words. And Melissa knows, and she knows what's going on. I'm like, oh, I thought I wasn't going to make the word count for the Murder of Cricket Kugler. I was I was hitting a lot of mental blocks. Some of it because of what's going on right now, that was part of it, changing to working from home, all of that, the stress of the world. But I finally discovered that the real problem wasn't just that. It's that there was too much content in a large span of time. The first two books really only happened between when Tunstall is killed in February of 1878, and then it finishes in July of 78. The last book actually will span from 79 to 81. And so my true problem was that I was a deer in headlights with too much data and not knowing what to put in there. So finally I said, okay, stop. What do people who love Billy want to read? What are the historical things? Because there's a lot. There's a lot of things that still happen in that time. But I had to say, okay, what are the big things that everybody always talks about? What are the things that they're going to want to read about? They're going to want to read about his escape. They're going to want to read about when he's captured. They're going to want to read about when Baudry is killed. That's not a shock. It's in history, folks. They're going to want to know about what happens to Folliard. They're going to want to, these are the big things that happen, and they're going to want to read those scenes. And so I made a list of all of the historical scenes that I felt people cared the most about. And that's where I put my focus. Instead of focusing on how things had to flow time-wise and they shouldn't have too much space, I said, screw it. And I ended up just letting it jump a year at a certain point, because what matters is the content, not my predetermined, oh, I like this kind of flow, it needs to look like this, you know. So, but yeah, but I'm wordy. And I didn't think I'd do it in that one. And I actually, when I finally did put it all together, it is at the right word count, and I was shocked. But I did have a hard time for a while. First time for me, really.
That's funny.
I know.
All right, so now comes a fun one. What is the best or worst advice that you guys have received in relation to your writing? And I'll start with you, JD.
The best or worst advice I ever received?
Yes.
The best advice I think I ever got was working with a developmental editor for my first time. I got the edits back and it was like crushing, right? Because it's supposed to be. And I said to this person holding up, I printed out the comments and like held it up, and it was like bleeding red ink, you know, like just pouring out. And I said to this person, before we go over all of the comments, can you just, for my ego, tell me if there's anything here that you actually liked? And she said to me, oh, I loved it. And I was like, are you sure? Because like, I'm looking at this and there doesn't seem to be anything that you liked. And she said to me, and this was the best piece of advice I'd ever gotten. She said, you paid me to tell you what's wrong with it, not what's right with it. And that was exactly true. I had paid her to tell me what needed to be fixed, not to blow smoke up my you-know-what and tell me all the niceties, right? She said like a few nice things, like, but that wasn't the point. The point of a developmental editor is to tell you all the things that need to be fixed before you can move on and turn this into a novel that you can sell. And that's the goal. And if you're not ready to hear that, then don't work with a developmental editor. And that's what you pay them for. You pay them to tell you everything that's wrong. So sit down and listen to that. So that was probably the best piece of advice I ever got about listening to a developmental editor and what their role is.
I think new writers kind of expect what you were talking about of, you know, tell me the good stuff, but exactly.
Well, and it's hard. It can be heart-wrenching, right? To listen. You've given them your best thing, like this is the best I can do, and then what you get back is it's torn up into a lot of pieces. But that's what their job is. and they need to tell you everything that's wrong, because otherwise you have no idea where to go with it to make it better. And you know, that's what she said. You paid me to tell you everything that's wrong with it.
Perfect.
That's my job. So,
all right, Samantha.
So when I started to take my writing seriously, my biggest struggle was actually developing a discipline, a system that worked and let me build momentum, because I'd spent 42 years before that writing when I felt like it, when I felt inspired, you know, when I was in the mood. And you don't finish anything very quickly when that's the process you use. So I met James Maxey. He's another fantasy writer who happens to live in the same town that I live in. And he was teaching some little writing workshops at my public library. And I signed up for them because I'm always looking for a way to learn, a way to make it faster. And when I talked to him about that, about momentum, about being able to just keep going, he told me that something he does is in each day's writing session, he tries to stop before he feels done. That he, you know, when he feels like there's still some more story right here in his head that he could have written, he stops and gives himself a little note for tomorrow that says like, hey, James, or in my case, hey, Samantha, when you come back to this tomorrow, blah, blah, blah. And it means that when he comes back to the next writing session, his path is kind of laid out for him to keep on going. And that was fantastic for me. A lot depends, I guess, what advice is good for you. It depends on what kind of problem are you having, right? But for developing momentum and being able to really use my limited writing time very effectively and not sit there and flounder around for a half an hour trying to fall back into the story, this was the best advice. So, yay, James.
Perfect. Gail.
I think probably what I learned from some of the worst advice I got is that you need to be careful who you take advice from. Because not everybody out there has your best interests at heart, and people speak from their own experience. And so, you know, for example, when I was in college, I knew at that point I wanted to be a writer, and then I wanted to write epic fantasy, which is why I majored in medieval history. And I signed up for a public speaking course. I was 19, and we had to go around the room and say why we had signed up for it. And with the self-confidence only a 19-year-old can have, I said, well, someday I'm going to write novels and I'm going to be speaking in front of audiences, and I want to make sure I know how to do it well. And my professor got red in the face, and he was so angry at me. And he said, I have all these degrees, he put it differently, but I have all these degrees and all this experience, and I've never been able to get published. So what makes you think you ever will? You said that to a 19-year-old?
Oh.
No.
Wow.
Bitter
Forward. Much?
Yeah. Fast forward, I have 40 books in print and he's dead. So, I mean, you know, I won. But
well.
Wow. So now where that did not go where I thought it was going to go.
I swear I had nothing to do with it. But the point is that guy was not coming from any interest in my own, in my welfare or anything. You know, he, like somebody said about bitter. Yeah, he's totally in his own thing. And you can run into people like that. The first time I tried to go to any kind of a writer's group, everybody was so busy being kind of jealous and snipey about what everybody else wrote because they wanted to have the best story. It was not going to be constructive. And so you have to be very careful about that, because this is a rough business. You know, there's an awful lot of rejection. It took 20 years to get my first book published. There were a lot of times I didn't think it was ever going to happen, let alone the professor. So you don't need people piling crap on you. So you have to be very careful who you ask advice from and have a sense of whether or not their motives are your best interest or whether they've got an axe to grind.
Tamsin.
It's interesting you mentioned writing group. So I joined a writing group in 2010, I think it was. It was my first National Novel Writers Month I did, and they all noticed that I was very serious about writing, the people who were running it. And they said, no, we have a nano writing group. Through the rest of the year, we meet, and would you like to be a part of it? And I said, yeah, I would, I really would. And they were instrumental in helping me. The best and most difficult advice was because I'm such a world builder, and I really like to give you a feeling of being in that world, and I like to really see it. I had a lot of info dump, and I didn't understand. I really didn't understand what that. I said, well, what do you mean? This is information that's needed to understand I didn't get it. And they really worked with me on it clicking and me understanding how to break that up and how to do that. And they really cared that I succeeded. And what's interesting is that the core of that group, almost all of them now are published. Everybody who had each other's back, they're all now published. That's the small group that it started with. That writing group made the biggest difference for me in the world. Not only did they give me this, like they say, this is great and this is what doesn't work. They were hard on me where I needed it, and they were complimentary when I needed it. But they really did help teach me how to remove the info dump, how to build that world in a more creative way. And so they made my career without question.
Perfect. All right, so that'll do it. But before we leave, let's go around the room one more time. Let everyone know where they can find you for your socials and where they can find your books. And we'll start with you, Gail.
Well, you can find me at gailzmartin.com and morganbrice.com, B-R-I-C-E, and all of the social media is pretty much those names or initials and the last name, so I'm pretty easy to find. And of course, all of the books are on Amazon, and most of them are in wide distribution, so you can find them on any of the other book sites and in a few bookstores.
All right, perfect. Tamsin?
You can find me at tamsinsilver.com. In fact, there's 2 new things with tamsinsilver.com. You can ask me a question. I'm going to be doing a video series where I'm going to be live on Facebook or videos and doing podcasts soon, where you can ask questions that I will talk about live and unedited. God help us all. And I'm also starting you can also subscribe to a newsletter. I'm going to be doing a bunch of content that they'll get early on of video interviews from Lincoln and all of that. So you can find all kinds of great stuff on that site. It's going to be blowing up in the next couple months. And then obviously my books are on Amazon. And you can also walk into a Barnes & Noble and order something of mine, and they can get it for you as well.
All right, thank you. JD?
Yeah, I'm on Facebook and Twitter under JD Blackrose, but my blog site is slipperywords.com. So go to slipperywords.com and, sign up to follow my e-newsletter. My books are all there, so you can click to order them there. It takes you to Amazon, but it's easier. It might be easier to find me there. I do have an Amazon author page, of course, but slipperywords.com will basically take you to anything of mine. So go look there.
Perfect. And finally, Samantha.
So if you Google me, make sure you put Samantha Bryant author, because if you just put Samantha Bryant, you get Colin Hanks's wife, and I don't look nearly like she does in a ball gown. But that is also my website, samanthabryant.com, and on Twitter, you can find me ranting about the stuff that bothers me. That's Samantha B. Writer, just the letter B, Samantha B. Writer. And I use the same handle on Instagram, where you can see my pictures of mushrooms and sunlight through leaves.
All right. Thank you so much. Again, thank you, everyone. And thank you for watching. We'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.